Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in this episode, we're reviewing the new Star Wars Solo movie. See what I did there? Yep. That's the reaction that joke deserves.
Yep.
We're talking about Solo, a Star Wars story. And then we're discussing the biggest debate in cinema today. Which franchise is better, Star Wars or the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Better, okay.
Better, bigger, ruder.
I feel like we can get into the definition of the question later, but okay.
But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Yep, this week I read the graphic novel 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank by Matthew Rosenberg, Tyler Boss and Thomas Maurer. Basically, it's about 4 kids who rob a bank for a convoluted but surprisingly understandable series of reasons. It's been described as sort of the Stranger Things of crime. That's not a bad description, to be honest. It does have that sort of edge of childlike charm and camaraderie, although it's a bit more adult content than Stranger Things. There's a bit less of the constant, lovable, innocent charm and a bit more swearing and crime stuff. There is, serious crime business going on. But yeah, it's very fun. It's very tropey. It references a lot of movies. It references a lot of comic stuff as well. There's a lot of sort of weird role-playing sequences where the characters pretend to be fantasy characters or superhero characters and have conversations in character, I guess, to make the exposition-y conversations about their plans seem a bit more visually interesting, which again, I suppose, is a bit Stranger Things. But yeah, it just barrels along very nicely and very charmingly, and the 4 kids who are walking into the bank are very distinct and are a very nice sort of group. There's the brave but possibly dangerous one, there's the nervous one, there's the relatively solid upstanding one, and then there's the annoying one.
Sounds good. So is this something that began life as a graphic novel, or was it sort of serialised as a comic first and then collected into a novel?
Yeah, to be fair, I did actually abuse my own definition of graphic novel there. It was originally a 5-issue miniseries, and then it was collected into a single graphic novel collection, trade paperback, whatever unit. It was once a comic, but it is just this sort of 5-part self-contained story. It doesn't spin out of anything. It's not, as far as I'm aware, it's not building to a sequel. It's just this one book, and I think the book is going to be very much the final edition.
Yeah, and it's, I guess, best read as a sort of continuous story like a novel rather than as something that's been serialised.
Well, it does have the chapter breaks in the book, although they've been stylised slightly, and all the actual comic covers have been just put in a big collection at the end. It is very clear where the chapter breaks are. It does read like like chapters in a novel, I suppose. But yeah, it's just a nice, fun, whimsical book to read. As I say, it's only 5 comic issues, so it's only about 100-ish pages, so it's not going to, consume your entire life.
Sounds very good. Yeah, sounds like the sort of thing I'd be interested in. I do like crime-based story. I always enjoy a heist because you're interested in how the plan is formed and then how it inevitably will go wrong in some way.
Yeah, so I think someone said it was sort of compared it as a combination of Tarantino, The Goonies and Stranger Things. There's a lot of that, yeah, especially there's a lot of the sort of wry pop culture references and sort of criminals having little long, slightly silly conversations with each other is a bit Tarantino as well as being a bit Stranger Things.
Yeah.
But it's good. If anything I've just said sounds appealing, it's a very, very slick, well-produced comic. The art is just absolutely gorgeous. It's very sort of stripped down, but everything's all the kids are very, very expressive.
That's, yeah, sounds good.
Alistair, what have you been doing?
Well, I've been listening to quite a lot of music recently, trying to, find some new bands. Every so often I try and, get into some new stuff to keep my music interest ticking over. And a band I've been listening to a lot recently is Public Service Broadcasting.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of them. Their sort of concept is they take sort of old Pathé documentaries or radio documentaries and they set them to music. Yeah, so it's an interesting in that, like, rather than getting sort of one person's vocals and one person sort of singing about one subject, you kind of get lots of different audio samples kind of coming and going along with your sort of regular guitars, bass and drums. It's quite an interesting project. They did a couple of albums where each track is kind of an individual sort of sample or theme, and then they've done a couple of, I guess you'd say, concept albums. They did one called Race for Space, which is all the audio clips and bits of documentary they've used were all about the 60s space program, which is really interesting, and about, the moon landing. The most recent album they've released is called Every Valley, and all the audio clips are about a mine in Wales, which is, also very interesting. So if you're interested in something a bit out there, worth trying.
So are they songs in the conventional sense? Do they have lyrics, verses and choruses? Or is it just the music and the audio samples?
They don't have lyrics, verses and chorus. Occasionally there's the odd sort of lyric or, harmonising vocal they've put in. But yeah, in terms of like any sort of words you get, they're all from the documentary recordings.
Okay.
I guess it's kind of like similar to what you get in a lot of electronic music, which is like heavily based around samples. They sound a lot like a sort of mid to early noughties indie band in the kind of like music they produce, but rather than having sort of vocals, they've got samples. Yeah, it's good. It's kind of hard to describe what it's similar to. It does remind me a bit of the Avalanches, although the Avalanches were just used 100% samples. Like they had put everything together. They didn't, as far as I'm aware, like record any like guitars, bass, or drums or anything themselves. Whereas it's kind of similar to that, but maybe a bit more indie.
I mean, I do like a few of the old mid-noughties indie bands. Are they more like Franz Ferdinand, the Killers, or the Kaiser Chiefs?
I don't know. It's they probably remind me a bit more of like Interpol or something like that.
Okay.
I would say. Yeah, in the sense like the music is, although because of the concept, I mean, the music's more like a sort of soundscape than tight songs, but the way they kind of blur together is really interesting. And the ones that tell a story, the albums work really well. Like the one about the Welsh mine, obviously it starts with kind of like documentaries from like the 1930s when obviously the mine was a going concern, and then like they go through documentaries about the miners' strike and things like that. Race for Space obviously tells the story of the competition between Russia and America to get to the moon. So yeah, you get sort of early bits with like the first satellite in space, and then like Yuri Gagarin's first space trip, and then building up obviously to America landing the first man on the moon. So it's quite inspiring stuff.
Okay. I must admit, I was slightly put off by the not conventional songs part of it, but it does sound kind of interesting. I should probably give it a go.
Yeah, it's interesting. Especially, I like them because obviously I'm very interested in those two subjects. I do find something quite inspiring about the 1960s space and sort of ambitions. And, obviously I'm interested in Welsh mines. If you've listened to our episode of And Then What, you'll know that, I have an interest in, I guess, in mines in Wales.
I did wonder if that was the same mine in Wales.
I don't think it's the same mine, but there's definitely a lot of documentary footage used from that period.
Yeah, far more conventionally, I've just been listening to Weezer's cover of Africa by Toto.
Is it good? How does it rate?
It's very catchy. I've just seem to have had it on repeat for about 2 days now. I think it's starting to get a bit stupid.
Well, that does sound like catchy.
Like a disease. Okay, and now this fortnight's main feature. It's a Star Wars prequel, but don't worry, not one of those. This is Solo, a Star Wars story, a film about the background of original trilogy character Han Solo, featuring Alden Ehrenreich as young Han, as well as Emilia Clarke, Paul Bettany, Donald Glover, and various others in supporting parts. And yeah, filling us in on the background of basically how Han went from just a dude called Han to the Han Solo we meet at the start of A New Hope. Well, about halfway through A New Hope, I think, but anyway. So yeah, this is a prequel. It's the latest in the A Star Wars story strand, which seems to be coming out every other year to fill the space between the main Skywalker saga films, following up from Rogue One, which was mostly quite well received, including by us. We liked that film. So yeah, Alistair, did you like this film?
Well, yeah, I enjoyed seeing it in the cinema. I wasn't bored or anything like that. And this film is sort of further proof, if any more was needed, that Disney are capable of delivering a competent, entertaining, moderate fantasy violence 12A blockbuster. There's nothing particularly large I can fault with it. But at the same time, there's nothing I felt it really excelled at or anything that it kind of really like surprised or amazed me. So yeah, it's competent. I guess whatever in our rankings would be slightly below the coveted tight as fuck description we've given to some films in the past. But yeah, nothing that was, lit me on fire. And I've been thinking about this, and I think the reason for this is that Han himself isn't a particularly interesting character. I mean, he's a space smuggler and pilot. I don't know, I'm not really sure how he's more interesting a character than Peter Quill from Guardians of the Galaxy or Malcolm Reynolds in Firefly. What made Han a great character was how Harrison Ford played him in the original films, not so much the character itself. So Han Solo minus Harrison Ford left me going, yeah, that was all right.
Yeah, kind of the same, although I think I was slightly more down the scale of, yeah, it's all right. It was just about good enough, or at least okay enough, that I'd feel bad going, yeah, that was shit, mate. But it's hanging on by a bit of a thread. I felt it was very much just about okay. Like, the action sequences were exciting enough, and then there was also a long chunk in the middle between major action sequences when I was a bit kind of struggling to care. We have talked before about the Disney sheet of sort of basic competence, like you said. The fact that most films in these sort of major Disney, well, mostly Star Wars or Marvel franchises, you generally go in assuming you're going to get something that will engage you enough that you'll come out going, yeah, that's pretty good. Like, even the ones that are generally seen as being a bit forgettable, like Ant-Man or Doctor Strange, or the ones that, even the ones that were beset by production problems, like Rogue One. They've all turned out pretty well. Rogue One turned out very well. And this, I don't know. Although it is made competently enough, there's a decent cast doing a reasonably good job in their parts, with one slight exception that I'll get to. They've failed to really hang it on a character arc or an actual emotional journey or whatever. I don't know whether we've just found the limits of my sort of somewhat medium-level Star Wars fandom. I didn't feel I was given that strong a reason to care, which I guess is sort of similar to what you said about Han being an interesting character. Like, I thought Alden Ehrenreich did a perfectly fine job of playing young Han. He delivered his charming one-liners perfectly charmingly, but he didn't really go on much emotional journey during this film. I didn't really feel like he learnt much or grew much. He got his stuff, of course. We saw him meet Chewbacca and get hold of the Millennium Falcon. But I feel like they may have confused that with an actual character journey, because I don't really feel like he really went through much. I mean, he can't, of course, go through that much, because most of Han's character journey of going from a slightly sort of selfish bum-around space dude to an actual genuine freedom fighter takes place in A New Hope and the subsequent two films. So, in summation, because I think I've been talking for a few minutes now, lacked emotional journey. I felt that was the one part of the usual Disney competence that didn't quite make it. I mean, I saw Deadpool 2 a few weeks ago, as you may know, because we reviewed it on this podcast, and I thought even that did a slightly better job of giving me an emotional connection to the character and dragging me in, even though that film is clearly, as we said at the time, knows it's deeply stupid.
Yeah, I think you're right that there isn't much of the character sort of learning and growing, because I think there isn't really much learning and growing for Han to do. Like, say, there's no kind of deep sort of, I don't know, revelation about the character in that, you know, he doesn't have a particularly, like, compelling backstory like, say, Malcolm Reynolds does as a character, how he used to be an idealist, you know, a sort of soldier in a great cause, and now he's a cynic, but he's still got that kind of, that little gleam of idealism in him. And Peter Quill has a great story about, like, it's a family story in that he lost his mum and then ran away from his grief and is sort of, searching for a family.
Yeah.
So there's there's fundamental things here. I mean, they tried to do some of that with Han. Basically, he wants to escape from the kind of awful industrial Corellia planet that he lives on, and obviously he wants to get out with his girlfriend, played by Emilia Clarke. Yeah, and he's got this kind of yearning to sort of escape and get his own ship and be free. Yeah, but I say there's not much more to the character than that. Kind of is quite archetypal. Han in the original Star Wars films is also quite archetypal. I mean, as a lot of people pointed out, one of the things that makes Star Wars great is not George Lucas's ability to write sort of amazing characters and amazing dialogue. He's got some great story and obviously some really good actors, especially like Harrison Ford, who is like one of the big actors of the 70s and 80s. He's got a lot of great parts in him and he's got real screen presence. So I just left thinking that other than this being a Star Wars film, so what was kind of special about it? Because, I am a big Star Wars fan. Star Wars is a big part of my childhood. And I can see what you were saying, that as someone who's, not a huge Star Wars fan, this could leave you feeling a bit cold. Yeah, I can see that. But even someone like me who is a big Star Wars fan, I don't know, I didn't feel this kind of added anything to the to the universe, or really had something that made it shine, other than the fact it was a Star Wars film. I mean, it's not as funny as Guardians of the Galaxy. It's not as gripping as the original Star Wars films, where it doesn't have that kind of wow factor of great space opera stories like Mass Effect or the work of Ian Banks. I don't know, it's just a sort of competent heist movie.
The critic Gavia Baker-Whitelaw, who I've quoted before and probably will quote again, as she's very good, she's recently done an episode of her podcast Overinvested about this film, which was also good. But one of her big points about this film was that she said it felt a bit like a tie-in novel, rather than an actual standalone movie in the way that previous movies have, and I don't think she's wrong.
Yeah, that sounds right.
There's a degree of, if you're interested enough to pick up a tie-in novel, then you're the sort of person who's interested enough to find out in how Han met Chewie and how Han got hold of the Millennium Falcon. But I am not one of those people. I feel like we've reached a point where we're just taking bits and going, let's look at that for a bit. I mean, it's clearly possible to make these sort of supplemental stories work, because, as I said, Rogue One was good. But this, I think, is looking for its supplemental story in kind of the wrong place. I don't think Han Solo is the part of the Star Wars universe that was crying out to be explored more.
No.
Having said that, now that I've established, I think, at some length that I think this film was slightly pointless, I should probably talk about the actual content of the film. Yeah, as I say, the actual heisty action sequences were mostly pretty good.
They were, yeah.
Yeah, there's one bit where a character has to kill themselves to finish a heist or something, and I thought that was a bit vaguely defined about why they suddenly had to do that. But aside from that, they had a good sort of cast. Woody Harrelson is always reliable to turn up and do a sort of world-weary man bit. Thaddeus Newton was quite fun. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, as the new droid, was sort of playing it a bit broadly cartoony, which I suspect probably annoyed some people, and it did seem a bit weird compared to the otherwise actually slightly subdued, not that funny vibe of this film. But it was amusing. It did provide a bit of a spark of silly entertainment amid the film.
Yeah, I thought Phoebe Waller-Bridge's droid was good. Again, it added a bit of humour to the film. this was a film that didn't actually have that many sort of jokes or humorous bits in it, which I found strange because, again, the part of the Disney basic competence formula is, as we've established, kind of action plus a few jokes. And also because Han is is supposed to be a kind of a wisecracking sort of funny character. Again, I think that's more down to Harrison Ford, the fact that he's very good at putting little bits of humor into a part in a dramatic story without making the character seem like a clown. He can play a sort of tough, grizzled hero that occasionally can drop the odd sort of humorous one-liner.
Yeah.
I thought Donald Glover was really good as Lando. I mean, I thought, real charisma. Again, one of these sort of people, when he's on screen, you're always looking at him. Kind of like how Han, played by Harrison Ford, sort of steals the limelight from Luke a bit in the original Star Wars. I think Donald Glover as Lando kind of stole the limelight from Han in this film a bit. I mean, Donald Glover's a great talent. He's great in Spider-Man. He's great in lots of stuff that he's been in.
Yeah, as somebody who's seen almost all of Community, he's also pretty great in that. I felt they could have given him a bit more to do. It felt like he was, after he provided a ship, he was just kind of there. But yeah, he is clearly a very charismatic guy playing a very, big, camera-friendly, scene-stealing part, so fair enough. To be honest, it felt a bit like he was kind of here to set up his own possible future film, which, cheap though it may feel, I would watch it. Because, Lando is, unlike Solo, a part of Star Wars that has been left sort of quite unexplored and quite mysterious, and therefore would, I think, probably better fodder for a big, exciting prequel film than Solo.
Yeah, because there's kind of more to explore in that character, and also they've got a great actor who's really good at playing the part. I've said various things that I was kind of felt this film sort of left me a bit uninspired. There were the odd moment that really, I guess, reached out to that kind of inner kid inside me who's, always been a Star Wars fan and loves Star Wars, such as the first time when Han and Chewie get behind the controls of the Millennium Falcon. That's the first time in the film they use the original Star Wars theme, drops in, and that kind of moment was like, wow, that's, there was a kind of real kind of wow moment there. But I guess moments like that were a bit too few and far between. You don't want to make a whole film that's just kind of callbacks, to the classic films. It needs to be a film that stands by itself. And I'm glad they didn't just riddle it with references and little, that's the origin of this, that's the origin of that.
There was quite a lot of that, though. I mean, there was the origin of Han's blaster, there was the origin of meeting Chewie, getting the Millennium Falcon. There was quite a lot of how Han learned to do his tricks. There was a few more on-the-nose sort of dialogue callbacks. Although, I may sound like I'm complaining, but there's a callback to the famous I love you, I know dialogue from Jedi, which that did make me laugh, possibly because it was just the sort of resigned, weary tone of it that I enjoy.
There's also a bit when they're going to do an incredibly dangerous bit of flying, and then Han just goes, I've got a good feeling about this. That's a good one, because obviously throughout the original Star Wars trilogy, Han's line is, whenever they come up with a silly idea, he's always like, I've got a bad feeling about this. So that was a nice
that felt a bit on the nose to me, but for some reason I enjoyed the one slightly weary one. But as I say, I think there were a lot of callbacks. They were fine. I just feel like they slightly mistook that for an actual point of a film. As I say, most of the actors were good. I did like Alden Ehrenreich as Han. I thought he was good. He wasn't as good as when we last praised him in Hail Caesar, but he was very good.
He was good, yeah.
I never get that much from Emilia Clarke in roles outside of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
I enjoy her fine as Daenerys Targaryen, maybe just because she's really become that part in the time she's been playing it. But I've seen her in a couple of, at least this and one other, I think, thing other than Game of Thrones, and she's never really got that much presence. She always seems a bit one note compared to other big charismatic movie actors. Yeah,
I mean, she was in that Spike Island film about the legendary Stone Roses Spike Island gig. I mean, that film is just a bad film.
That is not a great film, and her part in it was basically nothing whatsoever. But she does have quite a lot more to do here. I don't feel like she entirely rises to it.
She played Jude Law's daughter in Don Hemingway, that's a good film, but then it's that's a difficult character to excel, because the point of that film is Don Hemingway is this kind of enormous character that's kind of full of exploding off the screen charisma, but he's also clearly a massive arsehole, and she plays his daughter who's a regular human being, and they've got a difficult relationship, because how can you have a regular relationship when your father is that character, it's hard to excel when you're I'm the kind of the normal boring person next to this huge character. It's difficult to do well in that role. I think she's still searching for the big part that isn't Daenerys, the kind of the second string to her bow, a part that's good and she can excel in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, my girlfriend has a harsher view and just doesn't like her. Just like you're wrong, Nick. She's not good in Game of Thrones and she's not good here. It's very consistent. But I just didn't think she was particularly good here. But yeah, anyway, when it got going and the action sequences were barreling along, it was exciting enough. There's a sort of a run from when they do a big heist in a mine to when there's a lengthy getaway sequence after that, which was pretty exciting. I was pretty much on board for that.
Yeah, that was the strongest bit of the film, I felt. They did a good job of addressing an important bit of Star Wars mythology, which is Han's infamous doing the Kessel Run. And they also did a pretty good job of addressing, I guess, what was probably a mistake in the original Star Wars, when they say he did the Kessel Run in under 12 parsecs. And obviously a parsec measures distance, not time. And they managed to do quite a good job of explaining how that actually works in reality, which was, again, one of those other nice little nods to the fans, but little nods to fans does not a great film make.
Yeah, I could make some barbed comments about but whether that really makes a good film, but it's not really aimed at me, is it? I didn't pick that up or care.
Well, it doesn't make it a good film, and like I say, that's that kind of thing is very much the cherry on top of the cake. The cherry on top of the cake is an important part of the presentation, but it doesn't save a cake that's, I don't know, a bit bland.
Yeah, I see you put a cherry on that poo. It is still a poo. But yeah,
I wouldn't describe this film as a poo.
No, that was me going to the toilet for fun.
Yeah.
This film is not a poo.
Just a bit bland, I'd say.
It is a thoroughly okay bland loaf of bread.
It is very much a vanilla sponge, where I felt previous Star Wars films, since Disney bought them, have been like kind of really exciting triple chocolate cake. Kind of want a cake now.
Okay, now, for this fortnight's supplementary debate question, we're going to slightly move away from our usual probing questions about format and genre. And since we've been covering a lot of these sort of big franchise, Marvel, Star Wars, blockbuster films lately, we're going to really let our inner geek fly and answer the big, full-on debate of our time. Marvel versus Star Wars. Which is best? And as I sort of muttered earlier, what do we even mean by best? I'm sure that'll come up. So, broadly speaking, as we've established both during the last segment and over the last year and a half of doing this, I am very much team comics, whereas Alistair is very much team film, and therefore I'm sure it'll basically break down to more of a general chat, but at least in the opening section I will be mostly saying yay Marvel, and Alistair, I suspect, will mostly be saying yay Star Wars. So, Alistair, why is Star Wars better than Marvel?
I think the core of the case of why Star Wars is possibly the greatest film franchise of all time is that without the Star Wars films, there would be no Marvel films. Star Wars created the modern summer blockbuster. In 1977, when Star Wars was released, there'd been never anything like that before. It kind of, took the world by storm. It created this whole huge summer-based action blockbuster, which is still the kind of default format for big films today. What Marvel are trying to do is very much kind of copy the template that was laid down by Star Wars in the late 70s. It's the go-to sci-fi, moderate fantasy violence film. Yeah. I mean, the highest grossing film of all time was a Star Wars movie. It's a diverse Star Wars film, actually, starring a woman and a person of colour. So yeah, Star Wars is, as well as being an enduring classic, is reflective of our modern society. And despite a slight hiccup with the ill-advised prequel trilogy, since Disney have owned Star Wars, the films have been very strong all round. So yeah, Star Wars, it was good then and it's still good now.
I mean, obviously I'm not saying Star Wars isn't good, but if I had to put my one finger on why Marvel is better than Star Wars, it is that although Star Wars may have started off the whole blockbuster franchise thing, I feel like Marvel have basically perfected this at this point. Surely the biggest hint of this, if anything, is that Star Wars is now trying to turn into Marvel. And the other problem with that is, it's tried to turn into Marvel by making these sort of side films like Solo and Rogue One, but it's also then quickly hitting its own biggest problem. Marvel was designed back in the 60s in the comics, and therefore they're bringing that forward into the movies to be, a range of interlocking mythologies which you can then spin off into different random things. You've got your X-Men corner, you've got your Thor corner, and your Captain America corner. They're designed to sort of have their own section of cast and section of story which you can explore, and for those things to be able to sort of intersect. And Solo, helpfully, sort of proving my point a bit here. Star Wars, I think, is going to start to fray around the edges, unless they really work at it, because it actually is only one story. One story numbered episodes 1 to 9, or 4 to 9 if you're someone who pretends that the prequels don't exist. So the problem with milking its franchise style is that it's basically going to fall apart when you realise that half the characters aren't really designed to carry their own films or be spun off, whereas the Marvel Universe is designed to be like that. I mean, if anything, as I say, I think the biggest sign that Marvel are clearly the long-term winners is that Star Wars is trying to turn into Marvel, not just in terms of trying to split the franchise like I just said. And spoilers, by the way, for the end of The Last Jedi, a several-months-old film. As evidenced by the end of The Last Jedi, when random kids start exhibiting force powers, the way they found to try and move it forward into the future, they're going to turn it into Marvel's X-Men. Case closed.
Yeah, I think you're certainly got very strong points with the fact that Marvel is now the go-to sort of format for creating sort of films now. Like Star Wars is trying to be more like Marvel, like get a bit more of that kind of Joss Whedon-esque, humor plus action combination. Star Wars has always had this kind of broader universe around it, as well as the films. There's always been books, games, comics as well, and other things. So I guess it is like a whole universe. I think one of the reasons why it's so enduringly popular is that there is like a whole universe you can get lost in. It's one of the things that I felt that like Solo didn't kind of really give you much appreciation of that broader universe, whereas like some of the great space opera, like say Mass Effect or the culture novels or things like that, they give you the kind of this big sense of like a universe. And I think some of the better Marvel films do that as well, like Guardians of the Galaxy gives you a sense of like this broader universe.
Well, yeah, just has to be willing to open it up. I mean, if Star Wars can get better at identifying the elements of their universe that actually need to be explored better, like as I say, I think Solo just wasn't that element, and know whether this is an example of them messing up how they make their franchise depends how they go. I mean, Solo isn't bad enough to sink the whole thing. It's just kind of low end okay. Yeah. So if the next few films are fine, then we'll all just forget Solo. Yeah. No one will care.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Marvel have survived plenty of just okay films. Not only Doctor Strange was, I guess, broadly okay. So both of the franchises have their weaker moments, especially if we extend the definition of Marvel to include like the pre-cinematic universe stuff. I don't know how many people are rewatching the Ewan Griffiths Fantastic Four films.
Well, yeah, I was mostly talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so possibly I contradicted myself by bringing in the X-Men. But then again, I mean, obviously there are also things like the Netflix shows and various things which do sometimes start to get the feeling of being spread a bit thin. It's like, do we really need a show about that on top of that? So yeah, as a whole gigantic corporate empire, they arguably suffer from basically the same problems.
And Star Wars is going to get a TV show, I believe, at some point in the near future from the Game of Thrones creators. And I guess that will probably like broaden out the universe more as well, and hopefully that will have more of a sense of the scale of Star Wars. Because one of the things I always loved about it as a kid, and I guess this is probably why a lot of people love about Marvel comics when they're a kid, is that I did feel there was a whole universe of Star Wars you can lose yourself in. There was like the games and the books and things like that kind of really broadened it out. You got a sense there was a whole universe. You could kind of think like, well, maybe I've got a place in it somewhere. There's a story in there that's kind of my story, and which kids really can relate to, and obviously can create with the toys and things like that. I know a lot of people to have a similar relation to comics as well. When there's a whole universe you can kind of get yourself lost in.
Yeah, it's weird. This is me at this point wheeling off my notes and making something up, so excuse my rambling. But yeah, it's weird though, because in Star Wars the extended universe, the deeper stuff, is kind of usually seen as sort of a secondary format to the movies, whereas in the Marvel stuff, there being this whole massive extended universe is kind of the primary format. I mean, there was always loads of comics, then it's come forward to there always being loads of movies, and that's across a range of different characters and areas, and that's sort of the way it should be. Whereas in Star Wars, I think they're having a sort of slightly awkward transition between the movies are the primary format and it's just the Skywalker saga to this where they clearly want to be, which is the movies are the primary format and there's loads of them split across loads of different areas and characters. Yeah. I mean, they may still manage it. I mean, as you say, Marvel have had a few slightly bumpy films as well. I still think Doctor Strange was better than Solo, but I'm not going to pretend it was a masterpiece. But yeah, I think it's just them sort of slowly trying to turn into it. I mean, like, there's a cameo at the end of Solo, which I can probably do this without spoiling, but it's a bit of a sort of a middlingly deep dive character who just comes back and appears in a vague sort of, I will be important in a later film kind of way. And that was weird, because it's not the sort of thing Star Wars has entirely done. I don't know, if anything, it felt a bit Marvel post-credit scene-y.
Yeah, I was basically about to say, this is more evidence that Star Wars is trying to become like Marvel, in that now there's a scene which serves no purpose other than to set up what's going to happen in the next film. Which, ordinarily, in a Marvel film, they save it for the post-credits bit. In this, they've decided to make it in the film, which at least they managed to get that better than DC did with Batman v Superman, but it was very much a kind of, here's the bit that expands the franchise and trails future films.
Which was weird, because other than that bit, it seems weird for the idea for there to be a sequel to this film. I'm hoping that bit will be expanded in a later unrelated film, or at least a later not quite direct sequel, like, I don't know, a Lando prequel or a Early Days of the Rebellion prequel or something.
Yeah, they're setting up that character to be a villain in, like I say, Lando film or the Boba Fett film or the Yoda film or something like that.
All of which I can't help but slightly roll my eyes at, which is just a bit of PR they're going to have to work past.
I guess so, but then with all of these films, it'll all be about the execution. It won't necessarily be about the concept. I mean, on paper, Ant-Man looks like quite a rubbish character, but the Ant-Man film is funny, engaging, I liked it. And even when I first heard of Guardians of the Galaxy, even before I saw the trailer, I kind of thought, well, this kind of looks like a sort of, they've taken some bits from Star Wars and some bits from Firefly and jammed it together whether like this could just be a sort of like fairly derivative sort of space opera. And then the film's brilliant because it's well made. I think Boba Fett may be like not the most interesting character in all of Star Wars. I think the fact that he's quite mysterious means that people have invested a lot into the character. You can do a lot with a character there's not much about in the original films, but whether the Boba Fett film will be good or bad isn't really based on the strength of Boba Fett. It's going to be based on the strength of who they get to make it and who they get to be in it.
It is obviously true. But I do think that Marvel have presented their franchise in the right way by making it largely about what's new and what's next. There's something slightly eye-roll inducing about this. It's time for a film about that character from the old films.
Yeah.
Setup. I think that's always going to be something that just looks a bit backward-looking and sort of strip-mine the property. Strip-mine it. I think Marvel's willingness to go, right, we've done 3 films of that character, fuck 'em, let's bring in the new. And largely not doing anything like, we're giving a film to that's a popular supporting character. They've not really done that much of that. And I know a lot of people want them to do things like give a film to, who knows, Shuri from Black Panther, say. But part of me feels that does, once you open that door, it does turn into, and that old character, and that old character. And I think there is a reason they've avoided that, and I think it's something that's worked for them.
Yeah, I think you're very right with that. I mean, this is why they've not done a Black Widow film, or they've not done any kind of Mark Ruffalo Hulk films, because Marvel have kept it fresh by keep moving forwards, and like I say, introducing the new. Whereas like Star Wars is kind of going to be dependent on going back, because the Star Wars will always have to be reverent to the original trilogy, so whatever they do is going to have to in some way take that as a starting point and go from there, there'll be an essence of going back. I think that's just pretty inevitable, unfortunately.
Which is why I'm right, and the Marvel model is a better basis for a universe.
I think it might be, it certainly keeps things fresh and moving forwards. I mean, I do think eventually Marvel might reach the point where they run out of characters. In both, there's a limited stock of characters. It might quite be a large stock, but they are both finite in that there's a limit to how many characters they can get out of the original Star Wars films. Like if they do a solo film for the band in the Mos Eisley Cantina, that's the point when you realise they've completely run out of ideas. And there are a finite number of Marvel characters. I think, as we said before, when they're doing the triathlon film, that'll also be the point when Marvel have clearly run out of ideas.
Maybe I'm not meant to criticise my guys, but yeah, I do agree that there aren't unlimited Marvel characters. And I think the fact that we're about to get a TV show about Cloak and Dagger, Marvel characters so obscure that even I don't care, is... Yeah, we have definitely done the A-list. Now that we've done Doctor Strange and we're about to do Captain Marvel and we've done Iron Fist, we are getting through the B-list at a fair pace as well. There are a few obvious characters left to do, like the current Ms. Marvel and stuff like that, but I am kind of curious at what point they just run out of A-listers, whether they start doing the really silly characters or whether they just flat out give up, pull the plug and reboot.
Or they just go with like supporting cast, like is there going to be like a Bucky film, a Falcon film, a War Machine film, but then that's basically what Star Wars does.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I think they've done well to avoid, but I'm just curious how long they can avoid. I mean, the danger of making a Bucky or War Machine or Black Widow film now is that, I mean, those guys have been hanging around in the background of other people's films for so long, but they don't exactly seem like a fresh new burst of energy. I mean, there's a reason they're making a Captain Marvel film before they're making a Black Widow film at this point. It's because Captain Marvel seems new, fresh and interesting, and Black Widow is still there. Yeah,
you're exactly right. I guess if we're going to interrogate the question, and I'm never happier than when I'm interrogating the question, what you define as a better or greater franchise, I mean, it depends on what criteria you're going to use. I mean, in terms of sheer money made, I mean, that's difficult because it was cheaper to go to the cinema in the 1970s.
Also, there were like 20 Marvel films, only about 10 Star Wars ones.
Yeah, exactly. Although, like I say, the highest grossing film of all time is a Star Wars film. I'm pretty sure The Force Awakens is still the highest grossing film of all time.
It's the highest grossing film of all time in America.
Yeah.
In the world, I am literally on boxofficemojo.com now. The highest grossing film of all time remains, inexplicably, Avatar.
I mean, when you get into these debates, like, for example, fans of world cinema argue that in terms of sheer ticket sales, Bollywood crushes everyone.
Yeah.
But it's very cheap to go to the cinema in India. But, I mean, that's a separate debate we could have. I mean, in terms of, like, other than sheer volume of money, I always think what makes something great is having a legacy and a lasting impact. One of the reasons why I think the greatest film of all time is The Godfather. Not my favourite, it's a good film, it's not my favourite film. I think it's the greatest film of all time, partly because it is a very, very well-made film, but because it completely changed the mould of cinema and was, like, the kind of defining film of the American new wave and set up a process that culminated with Star Wars A New Hope, which basically established the way we've made films ever since. And that's what makes Star Wars great, in that its legacy.
I mean, I think Marvel has sort of had a pretty massive influence on the way people make pop culture stuff in the present day, in the same way that Star Wars did in the 70s, although it may not have done it in quite as fresh and original way. It's just composed the parts in a different new way and then added in loads of extra stuff from comics. I mean, maybe that's what it's brought that's new. It's applied lessons that were learnt in comics to the cinema.
Yeah, I think so. And also, if we extend Marvel to all kind of Marvel properties on film, going back to Blade and X-Men in the 90s, what it's done is it's brought comics completely into the mainstream of popular culture. I mean, you couldn't even have a show like Big Bang Theory. I mean, it's nothing to do with science fiction films we've been talking about, but without the impact of Marvel making a lot of these characters, bringing them into the kind of the popular consciousness, you can't have like sort of fairly derivative sitcoms about some lazy nerd characters. I don't like the Big Bang Theory.
I liked the Big Bang Theory for a few weeks before I got bored of it, because it doesn't have very many jokes, it turns out. It just repeats the same jokes a lot. Yeah,
but I think it's an indicator of how Marvel have brought comics into the mainstream, and that comics are now, they're part of main pop culture.
I mean, I think if you're talking about actual success, I am lucky that we are having this knife-edge debate at a time when Marvel are on a bit of a sort of second wind high, whereas Star Wars have just released Solo, which is possibly the low point of their recent comeback, whereas Marvel is coming off Black Panther and Infinity War, and even before that, quite a few other films I quite liked, and which seem to have done well. So clearly, we're on a bit of a team high at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think what we can probably establish from this is that Star Wars obviously is great and has a lasting legacy and changed cinema a lot, but what obviously is clearly the dominant force in cinema now is Marvel, as you pointed out, because Star Wars is trying to be like Marvel, that shows their dominance in that. I guess one's the past, one's the future, maybe. I don't know.
I think, as I say, I think ultimately Marvel is doing well at the moment, and because it's forward-looking, and Star Wars, I don't know, it needs to find a way of seeming forward-looking, I think, if it's going to advance into the future, and maybe it will. As I've said, I've learnt not to underestimate the power of a Disney money-making machine to find a way to make money and get good reviews at the same time.
Yeah, I think the ultimate winner here is Disney, obviously.
Well, yeah, exactly. We're arguing which of the two Disney franchises we want to give our money to more. Disney will be okay.
That's all we have time for this episode. If you have enjoyed Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. If you want more Moderate Fantasy Violence, then you can visit our website, ModerateFantasyViolence.com, where you can find back episodes of the podcast, short audio clips, and bonus pieces written by Nick and myself, including an article I wrote about Deadpool following on from our last episode.
Yep, and if you want still more after that, you can also go to the social medias, where we are MFV Podcast on Twitter, or just search Moderate Fantasy Violence. And if you search Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook, we should also come up. So yeah, do that, it's good. And I've been Nick Bryan. If you want more from me, you can find me at NickMB on Twitter, or nickbryan.com on the internet. And of course, my latest crime book in my Hobson & Choice series, entitled Angelina's Choice, which contains at least 2 decent quality puns, came out about a week before this podcast did. So if you haven't read that series, there's now 5 of them. Dig in. Thank you.
Yes, get it now before it becomes a major Disney franchise.
Yeah, episode 472 of Modern Fantasy Violence, Marvel versus Star Wars versus Hobson & Choice.
It's coming, so read the books to be ahead of the curve. If you're interested in more from me, you can follow me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time when we will be discussing the new Marvel comic, Immortal Hulk, written by Al Ewing and with art by Joe Bennett.
Bye.
Bye. Sorry, okay, cool.